it's Quintero from mediaonq, and today we're going to be taking a look at one of Canon's new 4K cameras, the Canon XC10 4K Professional Camcorder. I've had the opportunity to shoot on this system for the past couple of months in a variety of indoor, outdoor, daytime, nighttime, interiors, exteriors, and even studio setups. Now, I'm going to say this right out for those of you who are not interested in sitting through the entire review. I am truly amazed at how much punch this camera system brings to the set. I won't be comparing the Canon XC10 against other 4K camera systems, but rather I'll go through what it can do, what it can't do, and more importantly, how it might fit on an existing workflow, and I'll use my own workflow as an example. Do I think that the Canon XC10 can serve as a primary camera? Well, it depends on the type of shooter that you are. For me, and in my workflow, it serves a much better role as a companion to my C300. If, say, I was going on vacation or on a road trip, I would pick up the Canon XC10 before I picked up my Canon C300, my 5D Mark III, or even my Sony a7S or a7. Let's put the Canon XC10 into perspective. So when I first purchased my C300, I paid $16,000 US. The Canon XC10 currently sells for $2,500 US. Now clearly, we're talking about two very different price points here. So the Canon C300 is my camera of choice for my type of shooting, right? So do I think that I could replace my C300 with the Canon XC10? Not at all. But this camera system does a really good job as a companion camera to the Canon C line. I first saw the Canon XC10 in a behind-the-scenes video for the launch video that they did when they released, or announced actually, the Canon C300 Mark II. I have to say, at first I didn't think much of it. I mean, frankly, it looked like just another DSLR. At about the same time, NAB 2015, Canon released a second video where they decided to go into details about this camera system. And they touched on one point that made an impact for me: C-Log. C-Log, or Canon log, is Canon's flavor of log, or a flat shooting profile. You see, the combination of 4K internal recording in 422 color, even if it is 8-bit, at this particular price range with C-Log is incredibly appealing to me, because that one single feature, C-Log, can save me a tremendous amount of time in post. The Canon XC10 is a 4K camera that is ready to shoot 4K internally straight out of the box for most situations. Now, I'm saying it's ready to shoot for most situations because this camera ships with a battery, plug-in power, a CFast 2.0 card and 2.0 card reader. It has a fixed lens, and it has a loop that you can use as a viewfinder when shooting outdoors. Just like with any other camera system, there are other items that you're going to need to complete your production, like lights, microphones, filters, more CFast 2.0 cards, and so on. And because of the Canon XC10's form factor, if you're going to shoot on location or run and gun type shooting, you will need a rig. Canon calls the XC10 a professional camcorder. So let's do a quick comparison against my professional camcorder, the Canon C300. In my opinion, and I'm sure a lot of other people would agree, there are a lot of tools and items that are missing from this camera that would make it a true professional camcorder. For starters, we don't have an XLR audio option. We don't have SDI out or Genlock. We don't have a waveform monitor or a vector scope. In my opinion, because these are tools that are needed in professional productions, I would say that this is not quite a professional camcorder. Okay, so now let's go over the build quality. I will say right off the bat that I feel like this is really well built. It feels nice and sturdy and professional in my hands. Nothing feels too plasticky or not with enough weight. It looks like it's a really nice, refined, finished product. The entire body is made out of some kind of metal, and the handle is coated in a high-end plastic, and it articulates, which is a really handy feature. Now, while the build quality is nice, it really doesn't compare when you compare build quality and weatherproofing of the 5D Mark III or the 7D Mark II. The Canon XC10 uses a 1-inch sensor, which I believe is about the same as a 16mm CMOS sensor, and it captures Ultra HD 4K at 2160p. This is what we're used to seeing on YouTube as 4K. You can capture in 4K at 29p, 24p at 305 megabits per second in 422 8-bit color. The 4K 422 8-bit color is a great deal of information, and this is why we need those faster CFast 2.0 cards. A 64 gigabyte CFast 2.0 card will allow you to capture 4K for about 28 minutes. So if you're planning on shooting in 4K, I would suggest that you have at least 3 of those cards, because you will be filling them up faster than you can offload them using USB 3.0. This was a frustrating point for me, and that's why I purchased a Thunderbolt CFast 2.0 card reader. It makes a world of difference. A typical shoot for me runs for about 4 hours, so I need to get to the point where I can cover a typical shoot without offloading cards. And I only have 3 64 gigabyte CFast 2.0 cards. So to do that, that means I need to invest additional dollars on more CFast 2.0 cards. That's something you should definitely keep in mind when considering this camera system, because it will add to your overall investment. I want to talk about recording formats for a second. The Canon XC10 captures MPEG-4 codec wrapped in an MXF container. And what that means is that prior to September 10th, there wasn't anything I could do with my footage if I was planning on only using Final Cut Pro X. Fortunately, they've released the plugin that we can now download directly from the Canon website. And I'll make sure to include the link in the notes below the video. Now, for what it's worth, editing 4K files from this camera system is not only easier, but it's more pleasant if you do it in Adobe Premiere Pro CC. The ND filter on this camera system offers 1 stop of ND, and it's either on or it's off. To turn it on, you actually have to dive into the menu. The only way to avoid that is to assign one of the 3 assignable buttons to that function. I've seen some reviewers talk about how the 1-stop ND is simply not enough in full sunlight or daylight. And they're right. If you're trying to shoot on the wide end of this camera system at f2.8, 1 stop of ND in full sunlight is not going to be enough. You are able to achieve proper exposure, however, if you stop down to f11. I was able to retain highlight information stopping down to f11, shooting in C-Log at ISO 500 and 1/48 shutter speed. So it is possible. So rather than fiddle around with the built-in ND, I took a completely different approach. This camera has a 58mm thread on the lens. So what I did is I screwed on a variable ND and bypassed the internal ND altogether. And of course, the variable ND made it possible for me to keep my f-stop at 2.8, keep my shutter speed at 1/48, shooting in C-Log at ISO 500, which is the native ISO for the system, and still retain highlight information. This camera has taken a beating from a lot of people about the fixed lens with a variable aperture. At first glance, it's easy to see how those of us who are used to shooting on DSLRs or mirrorless systems or cameras with interchangeable lenses would have a problem with this. But what does Canon have to say about this? Canon's John Saygood, during a preview video or feature video with Zacuto, said that Canon really didn't have a choice. No, really, they didn't have a choice? John went on to explain that there isn't a lens in the world that is manufactured to optimize or maximize the potential of a 1-inch sensor. So my guess is that if Canon was to release a camera with interchangeable lenses that offered a 1-inch sensor, there would be no way to keep up or maintain the Canon image quality or consistency. After all, it's no secret that Canon lenses match up incredibly well with the Canon sensors. And of course, I'm not a product engineer or lens engineer, so I can only really judge this camera system on the types of images that come out of the camera system. And I gotta say, the 4K images that this camera produces are simply gorgeous. Now, the XC10 can also shoot stills, and I've taken a few stills with this camera, but I will say that if I'm going on a job where I need to take stills, this is not the camera that I'm going to pick. I'm going to pick up my Sony A7 or my 5D Mark III. And that's not to say that there's a problem with the image quality or the stills capabilities of this camera. For me and my style of shooting, in my workflow, I just love and appreciate the full frame sensor image quality in stills. The manual focusing system on this camera is focus by wire. So it's very much electronic. And what that means is that you can't rely on muscle memory to rack focus because the focusing positions are not always in the same position. You do, however, when you switch to manual, get a handy distance measuring tool on the display that allows you to see where critical focus is at that focal length. I really like this feature because it fits right into my workflow because I already measure out my focus marks on most of my shoots. You also have autofocus, and to be honest, it works a lot better than I expected. The one button push autofocus hunts a bit, and it's definitely not the fastest. Touch autofocus on the LCD display in the back works exceptionally well. And I would say it nails focus about 99% of the time. And when it didn't, it was operator error. So while this is not the fastest autofocus system that we've seen from Canon, it definitely gets the job done. The one feature I was most impressed with is face detection tracking. Now, is it fast enough for sports? I'm not sure, but what I do know is that it had absolutely no problem finding the faces and tracking the faces while it was flying on my Ronin M. And of course, the built-in image stabilization is another great feature of this camera system. There's also a digital image stabilization that essentially zooms in and then rotates and crops out the shake to try to stabilize your footage. And frankly, I'm not a fan. The audio options on the Canon XC10 are similar to other Canon DSLRs. And there's arguably a better, or maybe even much better, stereo microphone that's built into this camera system. I'm not a fan of using internal audio for anything other than scratch audio. So I won't be using that to get room tone or B-roll sound clips anytime soon. There is an option to plug in an external microphone through the 3.5mm input jack. There's also a 3.5mm headphone jack that's located on the battery grip. I tried plugging in my Sennheiser Lab right into the camera using the XC10's preamps, and for me, they're a little too noisy. So that's not how I'm going to be capturing audio on this camera system. The XC10 also has built-in Wi-Fi that allows you to control your camera via browser on your smartphone, your tablet, or your laptop. There are a number of white balance presets, but for me and my workflow, having the ability to dial in that Kelvin temperature is exactly what I need. The touch LCD makes getting to the menu items that you want or need incredibly efficient. I didn't find it hard to use or hard to get used to using. In fact, now I wish all my cameras had touch LCDs. The LCD is bright and it's responsive and it's nice and easy to use, but it is not bright enough to judge exposure or critical focus in bright sunlight. But fortunately, they include a loop that you can use as a viewfinder in those types of situations. If you want to capture 4K on an external device like the Atomos Shogun or the Ninja Assassin, no problem. The XC10 is able to push out 4K via HDMI to those types of recorders. And as an added bonus, you can use those to capture all of your recordings so that you can record onto SSD drives instead of the more expensive CFast 2.0 cards. The XC10 has 7 picture profiles, 2 of which you could set to be whatever you'd like. These picture profiles can replicate the Canon DSLR video looks, as well as the C100, C300, or C500 looks. The picture profile that matters the most to me is picture profile 5, which is the one that allows me to shoot in C-Log, because that is how I'm able to match everything in post a lot more efficiently, a lot faster, and a lot more accurately. The XC10 has 12 stops of dynamic range, and from what I've seen in post, I don't have any reason to doubt that. It matches up incredibly well with my C300. While this is not the perfect camera, it definitely has a lot to offer to content creators today. I've decided to add the Canon XC10 to my camera lineup, and I'll tell you why. Having the ability to match skin tones in post from this camera to my C300 sealed the deal for me. I'll be posting a video that specifically covers skin tones, matching, and examples on my YouTube channel, and I'll also upload it on my Vimeo channel in case anyone wants to download it and play with the footage. Until next time, I'm Carlos Quintero for mediaonq, helping you compete in today's web economy. Thank you for watching.